Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
Yes. And we're going to talk about an experiment that we're in. I'm very, very pleased with it. Jason and Rue have been working with, Jason works with the photographing the city meetings in Urbana, and he is knowledgeable about putting video up. So it's been suggested that we have a problem with the Prairie Monk program in that we often are missing the photographs that would tell 1,000 words. Like if I hold up a photograph at the moment, you'd get an idea that this is liatrus and it's a button liatrus, and we want to say something about that. But that really helps. So we're trying to figure out how to make a video out of a radio program. And Rue is very interested in doing that. So I may have her just to say a few words later so that you know who she is and what she's doing. And we are experimenting. Either we can hold up a picture like I just did, or we can take the program and drop into it several pictures. We don't quite know how to do that yet, but we're going to try. And so I'll go ahead with experimental discussion at the moment. I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but it's very, very helpful. We have a program up, and we have the URL here, if I put it in my pocket. The URL that you can go to is YouTube, and the YouTube has a dot between the TU and BE, so it's 2.B. And so let me run it again. YOU, YouTube, with a dot in the middle, and a slash, and TIS9 J8 KRJ30. Now, there's some capital letters there, so I'm going to roll it again. It's TIS in lowercase, 9, J lowercase, 8, K uppercase, R lowercase, J uppercase, 3, and then there's O. It's much smaller than the 3. It is not a number. So let me give you that again. We hope that some of you will put this up and realize what we're trying to do. Some of you may be able to help us drop pictures into this sort of program. YouTube, with a dot in the middle between U and B, slash TIS9 J8 uppercase K RJ30, and I'll give you that again later. So what happened last week was that Rue and Jason came, and they photographed myself and two guests, Chris Carl and Meredith Foster, and we're wondering what we can do. We're running with one camera, and that's not uncommon. It's convenient in that you don't have to do any editing, but it can zoom in, and it can be panned. So, Rue, why don't you pan in on the button liatrus, because we were picking this seed just this week. And that is helpful, you see. Now, if I'm talking about something like excessive mowing at the Grand Prairie Friends talk, I have a picture that's a little larger, but it shows excessive mowing. And so we can do that sort of thing, or we can drop them in. And let me show you another one, for instance. This is one of our favorite plants a little earlier in the season. This is a purple cone. It's a purple clover from Ran 2. So we can bring visuals. Sometimes I bring flowers just to remind you that there are such things. And sometimes we even have some problems with our equipment. So this microphone here is held up by toilet paper. So we have a roll of toilet. That's part of the technology, folks. When you're trying to do things with lower equipment, you do what you can. So now I'm going to ask Rue to come and sit down. Leave the camera going so that she will be in the scene. So you come over here, and this is your microphone. So Rue comes from China. She comes from the south side of China. Tell us where you come from.
I come from Shenzhen. It's a city near Hong Kong. And a hot city.
Uh-huh. So are you studying media?
No, but I'm interested in media, so that's why I volunteer.
Are you an artist?
No, but I have learned painting for 7 years.
Okay.
But that's not, I don't want to make it my job. I want to keep it to my habit.
Okay, now come this way a little bit, because one of our problems is that we end up photographing the equipment rather than you. So we want you to be seen in this camera.
Mm-hmm.
So come a little closer over this way and just tell us what you think about this sort of program. You've done this with independent media. This is not the first time you've done this.
Actually, it's kind of my first time.
Oh, okay. So this is hard on you.
Yeah.
I very much like the idea that you've kept your Chinese name instead of just giving yourself a nickname, which you have. This is Irene.
Ivy.
Ivy.
Yeah.
Ivy. Okay. But I like the sometimes you have a name which has a lilt to it, like it was a lotus flower that sometimes you have more than one word.
Yeah.
So I like that, and I wish you wouldn't have to feel that you have to call yourself Bill or Gene or what have you. So you've seen the tape from last week?
Yeah.
And you thought it was okay?
Yeah, it's good.
I thought it was good. I thought it was very good. So you're going to watch us again today, and then perhaps more.
Yeah, I will. It's my first one. I will definitely watch it several times.
We having introduced you, we'll send you back to your camera.
Okay.
So that you can do a broad shot or a close up or
sure.
and talk to me. Perhaps get a twinkle in the eye occasionally when I get excited.
Yeah, well, hope I can do it.
What she can't do is rove around with a camera. If we were more sophisticated, she could bring a second camera and take a photograph of an eye or a nod or what have you. But that would involve making editing, which we don't have time for. So one camera with the capacity to zoom in and out and the capacity to pan is all we can do. So we'll send you back to your job, but we very much appreciate what you're doing. So, okay. So now I'll just go ahead with my program as I might do it. And that's the experimental part of this. Just let me remind you, in case there's more than one or two of you listening, that the URL for this, first of all, the program went through and we checked it out to see if there were any obvious blunders or glitches or problems, and then we said no, looks like it can go, and so then it was put on the air, and you can get it on YouTube, and this is the URL for the YouTube.
Excuse me if I can jump in here. I'm also looking at the information, and there's a couple of characters that I think maybe I can see more clearly. Yours is handwritten, and I'm reading them off of the computer screen. So would you mind if I give the information?
Yes,
I'll jump in
please.
here.
David will give you the URL right from the computer.
Right. So once again, while you're used to seeing YouTube with no periods inside it, you can also get to this video if you go to YouTube, YOUTU and then you would type in the following. Now, yes, there are in fact capital letters. It's not case sensitive, so you can put them in upper or lowercase, and it will come up the same.
Thank you.
So here's what it is, upper or lowercase, your choice for the letters that I'm about to give you. TLS 9J8KRJ30. And you know what? There's a website, prairiemonk.org. Keep your eyes peeled to it, because this is just the sort of thing that we need to update and keep posted there so that people can see it. And in fact, he also has Prairie Monk as a Facebook account, and we can put that information up there. So if you haven't had a pen and paper handy here, there will be other ways for you to get this information.
Let me remind you that I was reading it as TIS, and it is TLS on the computer. And thank you for saying that it is not case sensitive. So read it again, David. So we would like people to access this sort of thing and think about how we can make a video program out of a radio program.
All right, one last time then. TLS9J8KRJ30. Again, you can go to prairiemonk.org or to the Prairie Monks Facebook page. This information isn't there yet, but we will. Dave and I get together after this show, and this will be our top priority this afternoon.
And remember that after the YouTube, there's a /. So thanks for being involved in that, and we would really hug you if you went there and checked it out and gave us some feedback, because this is relatively primitive video, but it's very helpful. We can put up a map or other things. What we have to have the talent to do, and that's where David is helping a lot, is to get perhaps a satellite map of a site up, or perhaps an interesting picture. It might only be 3 pictures in a program. We might have to put it in the corner, because me talking and fiddling with my hands is probably a part of my language. So how can we do this is a good question. And if any of you out there have skills in this domain, that might be very helpful. You might be able to take a program that we're hoping to put on YouTube and do interesting things with it. So, okay. That having been said, let's go to Rantoul. This week, Ron Sleater came from Decatur. He'd had a terrible experience there. He's been working with the Prairie at Rock Springs, and somehow, after years and years of work and collecting seed, they herbicided a weed plant, which is called vetch, crown vetch, and there's also the perpetual problem of clover, sweet clover. And so the administrator in charge of the natural area herbicided for those 2 things, and as a result, the plants that we were hoping would come up and wave their wooden leg within 3 years and 5 years just aren't there. They're subject to the herbicide that gets broadleaves. And so Ron was rather disappointed when he came to see me on Wednesday this week. We went to Rantoul. We're kind of disgusted with the amount of mowing. It is absolutely horrendous. Where there is nice prairie on the roadside, it is now mown almost with a lawnmower. That takes out the pollinators you can't believe. We had May Berenbaum, who was at the Grand Prairie Friends meeting, and she was explaining that this really takes out biodiversity. And some of the insects that are there are so inconspicuous you wouldn't even know that they're there. And just mowing senselessly for miles is not what I approve of. I was sitting next to someone from Rantoul, And I opened my mouth about mowing, and she and I stayed and talked afterwards, because she's been on committees in Rantoul that are oriented to preserving the dignity. Then Jim Smith from Vermilion County said, "Don't you know that everything other than corn and soybeans has to be mown?" Which is kind of a sarcastic comment, but it's very true. Everything has to be mown. I'm not sure where the rural sociology comes. I think it's a neatness symbol, but it's also a job related. If you mow more, if you have more hours, you get paid more. I think we can, in a state that is desperately short of money, this involves tractors, equipment, sometimes in dangerous places where the roadside is at an angle. It involves labor, and it involves, guess what, gasoline. If the price of gasoline goes up to $12 a gallon, it just might quiet some of this idiocy. But it's like across the country, millions of square miles of ground, and there goes perhaps 1,000 insects that are pollinators. 40% of our vegetable population and fruit and fruits as well are dependent on pollinators that range from regular bees to bumblebees and what have you. And this is really a sad sack situation, and how can we change it? Well, you change it from the bottom up, and that's what this video program is about, is to look at a bumblebee and see its stripes and convince you to go out and photograph the bumblebee so that we know what species we have and how they can contribute to a pollination situation. We can talk about small creatures that worm their way into an insect's brain and change the way that insect behaves. It can define the range of species, whether they're bugs like Hemiptera or Columbola, which is the beetles. And there's a difference of opinion. At the moment, we've got a nice yellow show of goldenrod, and that comes with a range of prairie species. It's prairie insects and pollinators. But then even the prairie specialists don't want a goldenrod prairie. They would like to have 100 species other than this one that comes in because it flies around in the air and it drops on your territory and grows very successfully and has rhizomes and whatnot. So not always are the biologists in lockstep with the people who are producing corn and soybeans or putting in prairies. They want biodiversity, and that's what we've aimed at for a long time. We also have to talk about preserving versus recreating. One of Heartland Pathway's major objectives for 50 years, and what is stated as our mission in our charitable trust organization, is that we want to preserve the natural soil. The soil organisms, if possible, the plants and animals on top of it, if possible. We want to preserve the terrain. So then it is very, very easy for someone to come and say, please, we want a road cut. You want a road cut? Why do you want a road cut? Because I have rattlesnakes that want to go to the creek. And a road cut will stop them. But then we have years of discussion about a road cut and the possibility of going to adjudication for $15,000. Wow. But even so, we go to the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, and there are 7 board members, all of whom are desperately concerned about people who really want to look at your prairie and say, wow, if you give us a road cut will have people who are sympathetic with you, and you'll be able to do more preservation. But unfortunately, when you get down to the wire and you only have a few acres left, you don't want them recreated. You can do certain things. You can, like the landfills, you can put sculptural pieces there and make it interesting, and interesting enough that people realize that this is not just a bunch of weeds sitting around. This is a conservation site, and there are people that care. So you can make those sorts of statements, but we need that land to be retained as if it was in 1820 when first people came here. We don't exactly know what was there, and there's a dynamic. The bacteria will have changed in 150 years. So it's only a guess, but we need to have a few acres of valuable ground that has a terrain that is natural for the landscape. If it's a Cerro Gordo moraine, you can see that the land is fitting into the hill. And we have to be very careful about whether we plant that to all compass plant or liatris, or and might be very interesting to do that. I went to Audubon, and one of the first things was we were talking about the Pope Prairie at Rantoul, and the question was, can you see that from 45? Is that prairie that you can see the liatris? Yes, it is, folks. So we may have just a little bit more liatris than was in the original prairie, but we have to be very careful about how we plant seed into that gravel pit. Not natural, but we're trying to get it to be natural. So we wandered around on Wednesday looking at the teasel. The teasel is a terrible weed for us. It is a wonderful dried arrangement in the cemetery nearby, and so it has escaped. And if you have one teasel showing, that means it's a 6 or 8 feet stem with seed pods on the top, then the Department of Transportation's weed team will come with a 5-ton truck and spray it with the scungiest of herbicides so that you have lost all the prairie that you spent 30 years getting that's underneath. So that the training is not there. So programs like this help to get information to people so they will talk to the Department of Transportation, which has 2,000 employees but only 12 landscape architects. And how do we get a message to them about what is prairie? It just looks like weeds, folks. We know it, but it's a very complex ecosystem, and often those prairie plants are dependent on each other. So one will grow as an associate of the other, and it's very hard to grow these plants in lines in a field. They're getting better at doing that. The Prairie Moon has done that, and they've reduced the price, the retail price of ceanothus, which is New Jersey tea, from $900 a pound to $600 a pound. Still quite rare, but we're making improvements, and we know how to get ceanothus to grow so that you can adapt a harvest equipment so that you can harvest ceanothus when it comes to peak. Always a problem, because the plants are very clever in that they come ripe at different times, so that if the weather gets your first crop, then there will be a last crop that might survive because the weather is different. Horticulturists don't do that. They have a monoculture where everything comes ripe at the same time. So if you were breeding tomatoes, for instance, you would have a tenderizer in your pocket. A tenderizer has little pins in it, and you put your tomato on the tenderizer plate and you push the pins in, and that tells you when the tomato is its peak protein quality, and then you can harvest. And you don't harvest it going and picking the right tomatoes. You've read it so that everything comes to ripe at the right time. You put a harvest piece of equipment in, and you can even start the harvest on the hour when the peak is there. So we're dealing with native creatures that are very biodiverse. And often if we're collecting seed, we will collect seed from very different sites just so that we maintain the biodiversity, the strength of that genetic plant. But really, we do need to educate people, especially trail people and recreational people, to know what a prairie is. We're having a kerfuffle at the present time at a prairie near to Muhammad. And part of the problem is that the weed trees have been chainsawed out. And wow, the people who are walking in that corridor, who like to stand under the shade of a tree, are finding that a prairie didn't have many trees in it, and they had to go. But there's been complaints to the Forest Preserve about why did this happen? Why did those beautiful trees have to go? Well, we were trying to keep it native, and the people who are genuinely doing prairie work are taking out the trees because they are not part of what was the original landscape. And this is on a planted prairie. It's not on a remnant prairie that's sort of Heartland Pathways territory or reason for existing. We do need that genetic pool, which in the flatlands has about 100 broadleaves plus a half a dozen grasses. The grasses are easy to grow. The broadleaves, there's probably 12 or 30 that are easy to grow, but then you're getting into the more rarefied atmosphere and you're getting grasses that plants rather than grasses, that are not easy to grow unless you know whether they like wet feet or whether they like to be dry and gravel. You then have to plant them to those places where you know their ecology works. If you go and plant cardinal plant on the dry top of a moraine, it will die because it just loves to have its feet in standing water or very near to poorly drained sites. So that cardinal plant needs to be downhill. If you're going to plant little blue stem, it needs to be up there on the top of the hill. If you're going to talk with cordgrass, you're going to have clones underneath in the ditch. And you have to know that the seed is going to take you a long time to grow. It might take 10 years for the seed to grow. Unless you find little tricks that will scoriate it or vernalize it. Vernalizing means putting it in the refrigerator for a while so it thinks it's had a winter. Those little tricks will make for it to grow perhaps in less than 10 years. But even better is to go with the shovel and take the clones, the underground rhizomes, and throw them in the new ditch that you're working with. Then you have a real argument with the drainage people, because we wouldn't have had agriculture here if we didn't have drains. If all the fields that you're looking at are herringboned with drains. They go from a small 5-inch drain to a large 2-foot drain, and if you stand on a bridge and watch the drainage ditches, they have all been straightened so the water will go off quickly. And we wouldn't have had agriculture if that was not so. So this poorly drained Champaign County was swampy. You needed that drainage. The Deutschlanders and the Frieslanders came to Flatville and they drained. They knew how to drain. They got the very best soil. They got the Drummers and the Flanagans. State soil is a Drummer soil. Rich soil, but damp soils. So how do you plow it and how do you maintain it? Well, unfortunately, one of the things you maintain it with is a 16-foot mower. And that's partially because you have to work to plant the crop, and then you just sit around and wait till you harvest the crop. There's a few other cultural details in there that you need to get along with. But basically, it's a type of employment which is dependent on huge tractors that cover huge areas in a very short time. So whereas if you were out there with a horse, say you had 10 horses, and you're going to put a plow through the ground, it would be very, very hard to do because you don't have that sort of power. Horsepower is what we assign to tractors and whatnot. The horsepower is not high when you have muddy soil and horses don't have cloven hooves. So then you have to go to oxen. And oxen have cloven hooves, and they have little claws on the back of those hooves that allow the oxen to actually move on slopes or into strange places. So an ox team can move your plow. After a while, you get the prairie broken down and you can put a plow into it. So the drainage people want the water off and they want the ground plowed, and now they can do it with a house-sized tractor with a cab and GIS and television and a computer and what have you. So you can do what you were doing in 5 weeks, you can do in a half day. And so there's a tendency for people who are in the 70s and 80s and 90s to be around because they've not got other jobs they can go. Younger people can go and get an extra job with the university or some other place. So, but people who are at home and have been desperately interested in getting the water off are still there. They're harvesting the willows so that the willows won't stop the water from flowing. So if you're a prairie nut and you want to preserve that water and have it absorbed into the aquifer, you're in bad shape because that's not the tradition here, and that's not what allowed agriculture to exist. So you're out there with 100 plants, and you're going to plant them into what used to be a brome grass site, sort of restored to an agricultural plant, so it could perhaps be used for fodder. You're going to mess with the landscape. So even when you do succeed in getting to plant a prairie, you have debates from agricultural people who first of all regard what you have as weeds, and they have really an intent to feel that this land is not being used for financial purposes. It's being wasted, in other words. But that's not true. If you have an agricultural degree with genetics in your background, you'll know that prairie has pollinators and a viability that keeps that vegetation alive and makes it so valuable. We have to watch the ethanol people who want to back up onto those little sites and put in mercanser or other species that can be made into ethanol. So how do you change this? Well, you change it by doing things with wee folk, little folk that are at the bottom of the pole. And it changes, it happens. So the video that we took last week is now on YouTube. Go have a look at it and see how we can do this for every radio program and have a team of people who could do this, and then tell us how to drop these visual materials into the program. Tell us how we can communicate with you with a web page. We're only now just surviving the loss of a website. We're working with an administrator who works with Microsoft and had 50 websites which for some weird reason were decapitated, and we lost the whole program when we had hundreds of pages on some of these programs. Not only us, we were just one of 50, but we lost. And so then I go to other places and people say, do you know that when you lose a domain, you can go back in there and get that information off the computer? Yeah? How do you do that? Well, I don't know, but you can do it. So we're looking for the character out there who knows how to look for our previous Prairie Monk website. It might just be there in the annals of the internet. And some of this sort of stuff is becoming more possible because we're going to have broadband, and we're going to be able to put up more information about more species. If you don't know what purple clover is like, then let's go to the internet and find out about it. Let's talk to each other. Instead of having godlike people who know how the prairie works, which they don't always know, then can we come back in and give you information? Can we sell you a plant? Can we have you go to a rattlesnake master run for the prairie, which will be on November the 4th? Get involved. Win a category and get a plant and a picture and a story of how you can plant that plant and where you can plant it. And perhaps you might be a computer person that would come and help us put information up about the Lake Park Prairie, for instance, or the prairie that's at Arcola, or the prairie that's Paxton. When Ron Sleater came this week, we went up to Paxton. Paxton has a wonderful little prairie. It's all on the right-of-way. And there are these little spots of prairie all the way to Park Forest South in Chicago. And we're worried because if there's a big move to put in a fast track. And guess what? The fast track needs room. It is magnetized or whatever it is, it's going to move fast. And you're going to get to Chicago in perhaps an hour and a half or 2 hours. So that you are close to the world that communicates. It's like flying into O'Hare. You communicate with each other. If we're not very careful, that will take out a large segment of our last remaining remnant prairie. And you go to little places up there, past Paxton, where we have white liatris, an albino liatris. And we can see that, but some of you need to creep around with a magnifying glass because some of the creatures involved, especially the insects, are so small that you can't hardly see them or see their characteristics, like their mouth parts or their antennae or their whether they're a moth or a butterfly, or how can we teach you to get to carry a magnifying glass and find out about these things? Very, very difficult. So we appreciate Rue and Jason coming and suggesting that we might be able to augment our program by making it a YouTube accessible program. Kristen Johns has been at it. She's been following us around Meadowbrook Park, and she has had her daughter Megan has done it. Her recent CD has been done in the prairie at Meadowbrook Park. And Meadowbrook Park started out with just grasses, because grasses are easy to plant and they grow in a spectacular manner, and you can sort of be in there like a buffalo. In fact, some school programs ask that I be discovered in the prairie like a buffalo, because I got a long hair and I could look like a hairy buffalo. So they bring the children along, and at a certain place I appear out of the prairie as a buffalo, and we talk about the role of buffalo. Those little pieces of information, we need to be out there, and if you can pick them up off YouTube and have the temerity to get that. Not all of us are computer literate. So some of you are going to have to say, hey, come and have a look at this. You don't have a computer, but wow, we see this little insect. And so Kristen Johns has looked at a wheel bug. It's a bug that is fairly aggressive, but it might be the sort of bug that helps you preserve your vegetables. And it might be a little rare. How do we work with this bug? So just a photograph up on YouTube is intriguing, because this insect has nice little armor. It looks like a sort of something out of the past with dinosaurs and the like, but it's still there. We have insects like weevils that get into prairie dock, and And if you see those creatures working, they have a long proboscis, and they can gouge their way into seed. And so we have not been able to get good dock seed because the weevils get at it. So the prairie itself has its own fleas that have lesser fleas, and so ad infinitum. But getting to know that, getting to just look at the seed and magnifying it, if you can go and get a phase contrast or a electronic microscope, you can see wonderful things in the seed patterns, things that would send you artistically up the wall because you just enjoy what's there. But you need the aid of a lens, We had people who invented lenses. I think, I forget who, but before we were there, we didn't have those lenses. We couldn't get into that level of the environment. I was sort of amazed the other day because some of this sort of information, this video information, comes through a video projector. And a video is tender. It's getting cheaper, but it's like $200 for a lens and $600 for a projector. And how do we use it? How do we show it to others? The university has an amazing number of classrooms that have a projector built in. And new teaching facilities, whether for grade schools or what have you, have that sort of facility. But we still need to know its limitations. It's very frustrating to go to a meeting where somebody who's new at the game of PowerPoint or whatever is standing there at the projector and they don't know quite how to get it up. So you have 5 people from the audience trying to help this out. And in the meantime, the time is going by and it's very, very frustrating. So can we improve that sort of thing? I've often thought that WEFT needs a video division. I've often thought that if we move out of the building next door, we're not necessarily doing that, but could that be a video studio that would augment the radio program? Some people are going to listen to the radio, but some people are going to be excited by the visual material. If I have working with artists, invariably we're talking about visual material. We're also talking about what we get rid of. I go to the hazardous waste thing yesterday. It was the first in 6 years when we had hazardous waste collection. And it was a little strange because there was about a mile of cars waiting to get there. And they were moving very slowly. I was to the point where I was trying to make a mathematical model of how much gasoline was being used in dumping X amount of hazardous waste. But when I got to the final unload point, my vehicle was boiling because this is like having a slow-moving vehicle in the parade. Most of the hazardous waste, or a lot of the hazardous waste, are in backyards of little folk that have broken down vehicles that aren't the nth degree, and so they do these things like boil when you get there. So they quickly got rid of my car, and I had to park it down the road some, and then I had to very gently add water so I don't break the engine by hitting hot engine material with cold water and get a cracked block. So I did that. I had to hang around for a while. But I was interested to note that I'd taken Masonic, a 5-gallon can of Masonic material that you use for tuck pointing. Now that material has in it what I regard as hazardous waste. But the hazardous waste people just looked at it and said, "This doesn't belong here. Just throw it in the garbage can," which really riled me a little bit because I felt like this material had hazardous waste in it. I eventually left it. I took batteries, but it'd take me a long time to get to that unload point, and there was a big dumpster, and I saw 4 cans of oil-based paint landing in the dumpster. So it's perfectly obvious that this hazardous material is going to be sent to some place like Kansas, and it's going to be dumped in a landfill that has a clay base so it doesn't leach. Perhaps it even has plastic underneath it, and it's going to go into a known situation with a certificate, but it's all going to go together. My thought about hazardous waste is that the oil-based paints would go in one direction, the used gasoline would go in another direction, and that there would be some technology which would allow us to either break the dangerous molecule or reuse the dangerous molecule. And so I was sad to see that all going into one dumpster and the liquids going into a big vat together. But that's the first hazardous waste collection for 6 years. So we're not very good at that. If you call up EPA and say, where can I put used fluorescent lamps? Well, if you've got a lot of them, you can do something with hazardous waste collection, but basically put them in the garbage, which I again find to be an anathema, because there's mercury in those lights, and we don't need to send them to Clinton with a truck that's chugging along at 3 or 4 miles to the gallon. That's a problem for the thinking about hazardous waste. And what is a hazardous waste? Can you put medicines in there? What sort of medicines? So who is going to open up this site in 1,000 years' time? Do we care? Well, the voting behavior is I'm going to be on the city board for 4 years. That's for your grandchildren. If I can't see my grandchildren or my grandchildren's grandchildren, then I can't worry about that. The world is too complex. I'm going to eat it right now, and to heck with the next generation. That's been pretty rude and crude, but that's the sort of thinking. Use it here now while you're here, and if you have good uses for it, if it's for energy or what have you, don't think about the sustainability in the long run. Fortunately, we have sustainability. It's become somewhat of a buzzword, and so people are taking a note of what materials they're putting into a building. When I first came here, if you went to Danville and collected wood that was second-hand wood, you could be fined, because there would be nail holes in it and wouldn't be quite as strong as a new piece of wood. Not necessarily true, because the new piece of wood has been growing fast and the old piece of wood has been growing slow, and it's got a strength that you can't believe, and it doesn't have those knots that the new one has. But if you brought second-hand lumber from Danville to Champaign and built a deck for your house, you could have it taken out just because you use second-hand lumber. Now you get some brownie points. If you're going green, LED programs, federal programs where you get brownie points for recycling materials and then using materials that can be recycled when this building comes down in 200 years' time. So you get some sort of award and a tax break for using materials that are recyclable. If they're not recyclable, we need to know how they can be broken down. If we're on a railroad bed and it's creosote, then you have to either bury it so that it's not dangerous. It has to be in a very deep pit. Or you burn it at least 365 degrees so that it breaks the phenolic compounds that are there. Those little regulations are avoided all the time. People put their railroad ties in to landscaping where the creosote leaks out. I often wonder about vegetable gardens that have railroad ties around them. We even eat in this generation some of those materials. I wonder sometimes if you have an urban garden and you're eating the lettuce that you're grown in an urban situation, whether that is you're eating some sort of hazardous waste. Often we don't even know what is hazardous. We're guessing at it. It might have been checked out with a mouse, but it certainly hasn't been checked out with a human. And the statistics is that you don't know very much because you might be dealing with 3 humans and you don't have a population of 300,000 humans that react in a certain way, and you have a statistic that is reliable. But for the doctor who knows 5 or 6 people who have this particular peculiarity of disease, then they're guessing at the drug they use. And it may have effectiveness, but it also has side effects. So if you're eating a drug, it might just, the side effect might be, this will get at your brain because it has to do with hormones and electrolytes and electricity running around your brain, and it can affect you. So as a rule, I'm very cautious about taking any drugs because I'm not sure what they're doing to me, because I don't think the world at large knows too much. Sometimes it's very good. They know what a certain thing is. Some of the vaccinations have stopped polio, for instance. So we can't be too critical, but we have to realize that in all these things we do, life is at the state of the art at that particular time. So if you're living in that period, you don't use silver or mercury to block your hat, because you will have the Mad Hatter, and people will know that Hatter's got that particular problem. But you move next onward, so onward and upward, and you make progress, and that's what we're hoping we do here with you folk. And one of the things we have to do is take a railroad bed and say to people that we have 33 miles of railroad bed. It's 100 feet wide. There's a ballast down the middle that has been obviously disturbed, has a little sulfur in it, has a little excess limestone, has herbicide on it, because these days you don't cut the weeds, you herbicide them with chemicals. But on the either side, there's a right-of-way that hasn't been disturbed. So either a railroad line or a trail, hiking or biking, will help to maintain that right-of-way. So we have 330 acres of right-of-way, and of that, perhaps 2/3 is viable for prairie preservation, and we need to let people know about it. We've got to the era where it's possible to preserve this corridor, but then we need to have the YouTubes and the web pages and whatnot, so that we can gather up those few people who will get together. There were probably 50 people at the Grand Prairie Friends meeting on Friday night, and most of those people have a serious interest in conservation. They have Grand Prairie Friends has just spent $400,000 to buy 140 acres down at Charleston, and that is a contribution. So the next thing is to ask if they might want to look at a railroad bed. Well, unfortunately, our railroad bed only has little spots of original prairie here and there. So does the Grand Prairie Friends really want to be involved in rough, tough prairie that might only have a few species, but it might be the only stuff we have. So how do we talk to Grand Prairie friends about the possibility of their being involved in trails, not biology, but trails that allow the biology to preserve itself? And then how do we work with it? Do we take down all the trees? No, we don't take down all the trees, because people know a tree. They love a tree. They hug a tree. They sit under a tree. They get lightning struck, and they get lightning struck because they're sitting under a tree, but they don't mind. They like the trees. So we don't manicure them out because we have a chainsaw that can do that very easily. If a railroad is overgrown, how do we work with that? How do we work with engineers who traditionally don't have a lot of sociology or biology, and gently inform them as to the fact that that leaf there is a dock leaf, and if you put your hand on either side of it, it will be cold because it's learned how to act as a refrigerator, where the wind blowing through it evaporates the moisture, and you take calories out of the plant. And you can actually feel that. Yes. And so there becomes a twinkle in the eye, and then the engineer understands. But sometimes we've gone from railroad engineers herbiciding 10 feet to 20 feet to 30 feet to almost all of that railroad right away. We have to change that. We have to tell people where the highest spot in the county is. Can you go up to south of Ray Street in a banner and look over a prairie, perhaps the Barnhart Prairie or whatever? Yes, you can do that now. It's a planted prairie, but so height has something to do. The terrain, the basic cross section of a moraine. Like the Bloomington Moraine, that has a high spot, which is the highest spot in Champaign County. Anyone that comes from a mountainous area really can't understand what this excitement about a hill is, but it rolls down into a flat side. So Dave is checking me out here. We have a few items to deal with. Dave will be interested in saying something about our ability to
The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers, and WEFT does not take an editorial stance. Back to you.
Okay, well, we also have to raise money for the likes of WEFT and for the likes of Heartland Pathways to be able to go into another generation. Think 500 years, folks. What will your grandchildren's grandchildren have as far as the natural area is concerned? Is it going to be all corn and soybeans in Mercanza? Or will we have some farms out there that have vegetables on them? Do you want to find the local farms that can survive? It's very, very heavy soil. If you go to a drummer in Flanagan that was under very damp environment, then wow, you're not going to have a potato expand easily or a carrot expand easily. So you might have to be on the top of the moraine, which is gravelly, where the Great Glacier dropped its rock and rubble. So we are responsible, if we're environmentalists, to do that sort of thing. Teach your children. And the children marry. This is incestuous. If you find conservation groups, you often find an incestuous involvement with the people. They marry each other. So we need to spread that sort of interest and excitement to other people. We need to dance with people who aren't the choir. So I should say that this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, and we say thank you to Rue for coming and doing this, because we think it's really a valuable thing to do, to have the visuals. So thank you very, very much, and we hope you see you back next week. And thank you, Dave, for running the board and for coming afterwards and putting some of this up on the web. We've got GoDaddy and we're gone, folks.